Alright guys, so it is still a daily occurrence that we are witnessing atrocities beyond human comprehension coming out of Gaza as hundreds are being killed on a weekly basis and Israel is rapidly escalating and scaling up their genocidal assault and pushing towards their final solution. So I want to focus in on just one of these recent attacks. Here we have, I believe this was in Gaza City, at a school that was essentially turned into a refugee camp or a shelter for displaced Palestinians. And you can see the aftermath here of one of these strikes that set off a massive fire. And what you're going to see down here in the bottom left is this little girl who thankfully, miraculously, somehow made it out of this situation and was interviewed afterwards. Her entire family essentially was taken out as a part of this strike, but you're seeing her walk desperately through this fire as it's raging around her. So let's go ahead and jump into this clip. Channel 4 News, I believe, did a good report where they show the interview with her. I'll move myself out of the way and we'll go ahead and jump into this.
Ward and her family had been sheltering in a school in Gaza City when it was hit by an Israeli airstrike at 1 a.m. Israel said it was targeting terrorists there. 5-year-old Ward wasn't one of them. She found her way out of the blazing building, but 2 of her brothers and 3 sisters were killed, along with her mother and dozens of others. What does the future hold for a generation of traumatized children like Ward, living amidst the dead and horrifically injured in the ruins of a territory Israel says it remains determined to control? Israel's onslaught on Gaza shows no sign of abating despite increasing international condemnation and diplomatic pressure. A series of strikes across the Strip left dozens dead on Tuesday, including almost all of the Sheikh Khalil family who were sheltering in a school in Gaza City. Our international editor Lindsay Hilsom now reports on the remarkable escape of one member of that family. And just to warn you, her report does contain distressing images from the start.
She stumbles through the flames. 5-year-old Wad Jalal al-Sheikh Khalil, her whole world collapsing beneath her. She was on the roof of the Fahmi al-Jarjawi school in Gaza City, which was hit by an Israeli airstrike at 1 a.m. It had been serving as a shelter where Wad and her family, amongst others, had been staying. Israel says it was harbouring terrorists. 30 bodies were recovered, but survival is its own punishment. The Israeli drone whines overhead. And Wad sits amongst the charred remains, stunned, shocked, traumatised, but only too aware of what has happened. She escaped with a few cuts and bruises. But she knows that 2 of her brothers and her 3 sisters were killed. And what about her parents? Is her father alive? What about her mother? But her mother is dead too. Her brother Siraj and her father survived, but are badly injured. 53,000, 54,000 dead in Gaza, and one little girl holding her uncle's hand, who has lost her mum and her sisters and her brothers, who's been displaced multiple times, who has survived to live in a landscape of ruins in a war that has lasted 1/3 of her lifetime and threatens to last even longer because the Israeli government says it will continue to attack Gaza until victory, whatever that may mean.
So what do you even say at this point? To look at this girl, what she went through, not only is this an attack physically on the entire Palestinian population in Gaza, but emotionally as well for children like her that somehow make it out of situations like this and survive. We're talking about a population of about 1 million children who will be traumatized for life, right? How many children are being subjected to that kind of a trauma on a daily basis that it seems impossible that they would ever recover from that mentally? How many children have been killed? I mean, at least at this point, we know bare minimum 15,000. How many more thousands have lost limbs? How many children like her have seen their entire families wiped out in front of them? I mean, the scale of the death and destruction and trauma is impossible to wrap your mind around. And even beyond that, in a broader sense, Israel is not only attacking physically and mentally the people of Gaza. What they are doing right now is an affront to humanity in general. It is an affront to the concept that human lives have value, that we should respect international law, that we should respect basic human rights. And I think that all of that is unforgivable. I mean, the idea, you look at a girl like this, you look at the aftermath of that destruction, and I'm supposed to believe that you guys were going after terrorists. Really? Does this look like a hardened terrorist to you guys? I mean, it's beyond disgusting to see what we're witnessing on a daily basis. During this attack, as here reported by Al Jazeera, about 36 people were killed just in this one attack. We also had another horrifying story that came out here from The Guardian, one of the most heartbreaking tragedies. Gaza doctors' last goodbye before 9 of her children were killed in an airstrike. So let's go ahead and read just a little bit of this here. They say, in the early hours of Friday, as she did every day, Dr. Alaa al-Najjar said goodbye to her 10 children before leaving the house. The youngest, Sadin, who was 6 months old, so lived her entire life in this genocide, was still sleeping. And like every day, with war raging in Gaza and Israeli strikes landing just meters from their neighborhood in Khan Yunis, Najjar worried about leaving them at home without her. But Najjar, age 35, had little choice. As one of Gaza's dwindling number of medics, a respected pediatrician at the Nasser Medical Complex, she had to go to work to care for injured babies who had barely survived Israeli attacks. She could never have imagined that farewell to her family would be her last. So a few hours later, the charred bodies of 7 of her children killed by an Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis arrived at her hospital that she was working at. 2 other bodies, including Sadin's, remained under the rubble. So of her 10 children, only 1 of them survived, along with the father, who is age 40 and is also a doctor. And both of the survivors of this attack are now in the hospital. Entire families being wiped out. A strike that killed 9 out of 10 of her children. At the same time, as we are seeing an endless stream of war crimes on a daily basis like those, we also have an update here on this so-called humanitarian plan that, as you remember from my previous coverage on this, both Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel, openly admitted that this plan was just to deflect. It was to distract the international community or backers of Israel like the United States, and to be able to say, look, we're getting some amount of a trickle of aid into Gaza, so please don't send us to The Hague, right? That's essentially the entire reason for why they're allowing even this tiny, minuscule crumb of aid, if you can even call it that, into the Gaza Strip. And this plan is being carried out in large part with the help of American mercenaries, right? And so update on that and how that's going, and then I'll show you some images from this concentration camp is what it looks like. But we had the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the American mercenary organization that's carrying this out. The director of that group just resigned, essentially in protest, or maybe, I don't know, to avoid complicity in all of this. He resigned. So Jake Wood has resigned as the executive director of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the Israeli plan for aid distribution in Gaza that bypasses established NGO and UN channels. Wood cited an inability to implement an independent aid delivery plan without violating core humanitarian principles as the reason for his departure. I want you guys to understand, this is an American mercenary company that we're talking about here. The guy who just resigned is apparently a former Afghan U.S. military sniper, okay? Not somebody who is not seen war or atrocities or war crimes within his lifetime. He's a former American sniper who served in Afghanistan, right? And then he went on to be a U.S. mercenary. And this guy is looking at Israel's plan for aid distribution in Gaza and is saying, even I cannot participate in what this is. Now, keep in mind, the aid plan, on top of it being sort of a distraction effort for the international community so that they don't get hammered on for brazen war crimes, the other aspect of the plan, or the goal of the plan, is to essentially use this limited amount of aid that's being let into Gaza after months of a complete and total siege and blockade of all humanitarian aid, to use it essentially as bait right, to bring Palestinians who are starving and desperate into these specific locations that Israel wants them to be at, and eventually over time to force the population further and further towards the south of Gaza so that Israel can fully occupy and conquer the northern and middle portion of Gaza, and then once they're pushed down there to the very south, to then expel them either into the Sinai Peninsula or into surrounding countries, right? So the plan is to use aid as a weapon of war, to use starvation as a weapon of war, to essentially finish off the genocide or to finish off their ethnic cleansing plan that they have in place. Now, to show you guys the pictures and the videos that are coming out of what exactly this aid distribution plan looks like when you have a starving population of 2 million people and you're offering up a little bit of crumbs as some sort of aid. We have an update here from Mohammed Shahada. He says thousands of starved Gazans stormed the dystopian Israeli-American aid complex in Rafah after being forced to stand in endless queues and bake in the sun in a fenced concentration camp while being subjected to biometric surveillance. They say that U.S. mercenaries and Israeli troops are now opening fire. And you can see a little bit of that video right here. Now, it's a little bit faint there. I did hear what I'm assuming is some of those gunshots that were reportedly ringing out. We don't have any further reporting on this or any sort of casualty numbers or anything like that. So I'll definitely update you guys in the coming days if we get more information on this. But you can definitely see the chaotic situation and how this is unfolding. And obviously, that's how it was going to go, right? You've been starving a population of 2 million people for 3 months straight. You have an impending famine that's coming now. You've already had dozens of people who have died from starvation, including children. How exactly do you think this is going to play out, right? And now on top of that, if they are firing at them once they're trying to get in to get to this aid, I mean, it's beyond words to describe what this is. I mean, look at this. This is some type of shit that you would see directly out of like 1940s history books when you're looking back at the Holocaust. This is a concentration camp that we're looking at here. Again, we have further sources who are reporting on shots fired. Unclear exactly if it was the American mercenaries who fired or the IDF or both. We also had another report there. And then again, just the images of what this looks like. Like, if this is not a concentration camp, then what is? I mean, it's not an exaggeration at all to portray it in that way. Again, with the openly stated goal from the Israeli government of the eventual mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Now, it's gotten so bad that we even have hardened Zionists in Israel who are coming out and starting to condemn at least some of this. Now, here's the first one, and then we'll get to the former prime minister of Israel. So, from Middle East Eye, Israeli opposition leader condemned his country for, quote, killing babies as a hobby. He says Israel is on the way to becoming a pariah state, which they should be considered as one. But he says they're killing babies as a hobby. Now, after there was public backlash to this statement, he eventually walked it back, right? And said, oh, I didn't choose the right words or whatever. Now, ask yourselves for a second, why would there be public backlash to such an obvious truth that he stated here? We'll get to some polling data, interesting polling data on that here in a second. But again, first, we have the former prime minister of Israel, who was the leader from 2006 to 2009, Ehud Olmert, who said his country is committing war crimes. So let's go ahead and read some of this. But keep in mind with the context that Ehud Olmert presided over atrocities and war crimes himself. If you want to read a little bit more of that, you can go and check out this Amnesty International extensive report, dozens and dozens of pages explaining what happened during Operation Cast Lead back under Ehud Olmert's reign inside of Israel, where over 1,400 Palestinians were killed, 300 children were killed as a part of this. You know, they say much of the destruction was wanton and resulted from direct attacks on civilian objects, as well as indiscriminate attacks that failed to distinguish between legitimate military targets and civilians. Such attacks violated the fundamental provisions of international humanitarian law, notably the prohibition on direct attacks on civilians and civilian objects. So you can go and read this entire report if you want further information on the war crimes that this man is responsible for and presided over. But you know, again, to show you that even a guy like this, a former Israeli prime minister, a guy who himself is a Zionist war criminal who committed atrocities against Palestinians, even this guy is now calling this out. So he says here, The former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, has said that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza and that thousands of innocent Palestinians are being killed, as well as many Israeli soldiers. So Olmert, who was the 12th Prime Minister of Israel from 06 to 09, wrote an opinion piece for the Israeli newspaper and website Haaretz that, quote, "The government of Israel is currently waging a war without purpose, without goals or clear planning, and with no chance of success." So I would disagree with him on this because I think they have been wildly successful if you understand what their goals were from the beginning, right? Obviously, it has been a failure if you believe that the goal from Israel from the outset was to eliminate Hamas or just to go after the perpetrators of October 7th. Of course, they failed on that front. They've also failed on retrieving the hostages using their military forces, right? The hostages that have been released as a part of diplomacy. But if you look at it through the lens of what their actual goals were from the beginning, which was to make life in Gaza impossible and to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population from Gaza, which is something that many of us were talking about very soon after October 7th when we heard the genocidal statements from top Israeli officials directly after the October 7th attack. Like, if you look at it through that lens, they've been wildly successful, right? There's almost no buildings left standing inside of Gaza. You have the entire population displaced and traumatized. We've seen a scale of mass death and destruction that is incomparable in modern history. And now they're trying to carry out the plan to force the population south and then to expel them from Gaza. So if you look at it through that lens, there is a purpose to the war. There are clear goals. There is clear planning, and they have succeeded on it, at least so far. So I would just disagree with him on that. But he continues. He says, "Never since its establishment has the state of Israel waged such a war. The criminal gang headed by Benjamin Netanyahu has set a precedent without equal in Israel's history in this area too." Now, again, we'll continue here, but you do have to disagree with him in the sense that, yes, this genocide is of a scale that it's hard to compare other, Operation Cast Lead and other situations like that too, right? Obviously, this is of a much greater scale than previous military operations inside of Gaza, but at the same time, it is a continuation of the violence that Palestinians have been subjected to for decades as a part of a settler colonial project and as a part of a slow-rolling ethnic cleansing, right? So it's not like it came out of nowhere and Benjamin Netanyahu is some unique evil. I mean, he is evil, but again, this is a continuation or a finalization of the project of Zionism in general. So that's an important distinguishing factor there. But he continues, they say, "The former Israeli PM and former member of Likud, the same party as Netanyahu, wrote that the, quote, pointless victims among the Palestinian population were reaching monstrous proportions in recent weeks, saying that recent operations in Gaza have nothing to do with legitimate war goals, saying this is now a private political war. Its immediate result is the transformation of Gaza into a humanitarian disaster area." He then went on to say that he had often asserted that Israel was not committing war crimes in Gaza and claimed with conviction that in no case did a government official give orders to hit Gazan civilians indiscriminately. However, in recent weeks, he says, I'm no longer able to do so. What we are doing in Gaza now is a war of devastation, indiscriminate, limitless, cruel, and criminal killing of civilians. It's the result of government policy, knowingly, evilly, maliciously, irresponsibly dictated. And he finishes saying, yes, Israel is committing war crimes. So again, when even a guy like the former prime minister and war criminal, Ehud Olmert, is saying things like this, is admitting, yes, we are committing war crimes, you know that it's gotten pretty bad, right? And again, given his history, notable that even he is coming out and saying something like that. Now, we also have an update here, I think, unfortunately, a predictable one, with Israel once again blowing up the prospects for a ceasefire in Gaza. Here from Dropsite News, very similar pattern to what we've covered before, even under the Biden administration, but they say Hamas and the U.S. reach a Gaza ceasefire understanding, and then immediately Israel rejects it. And then, of course, the U.S. envoy publicly blames Hamas. So this is, again, the exact same pattern that we have seen even going under the Biden administration, where you'll have the U.S. and Hamas and other third-party actors that are negotiating the terms of a ceasefire. And you'll have Hamas, as well as many times the U.S., come to an understanding with the U.S. saying, oh, of course, Israel's going to back this plan, Israel's going to back this plan. And then once they agree to that framework, and in some circumstances, even Israel says they agree to it, then Israel comes out and they completely change the terms of what they now want in the ceasefire agreement. And then once they change the terms, the U.S. comes out and says, oh, well, Hamas just blew up the deal, right? And it's this pattern over and over and over again. When the reality of the situation is, as I think anybody who's been paying attention could have figured out a long time ago, Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, they don't want a ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire. They want to continue with the Trump plan. We just had a couple of days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu come out and openly say this once again. He said his terms for a ceasefire or for an end to the conflict is carrying out the Trump plan. The Trump plan is the mass ethnic cleansing of the entire Palestinian population from Gaza. That's the plan, right? It's not difficult to figure this out. So, I mean, especially for like US media, like, can we not play this game anymore of pretending like it's Hamas standing in the way of any sort of ceasefire deal? It's Israel. It's been Benjamin Netanyahu from the start of all of this. Okay? And once again, seeing the same exact pattern play out under Trump that we saw under Biden. And notably, again, once Israel blows up the deal and the US knows that they blew up the deal, the US then basically backs them and says, no, it was actually Hamas. Hamas is to blame in this situation. So to a large extent, not only should you blame Israel, but you should also blame Donald Trump, right, for falling in line and blaming Hamas when he knows that that's not the truth. He knows that Benjamin Netanyahu is the one blocking the deal. Now, we also have an update here, not out of Gaza, but this is an annual tradition called Flag Day or Jerusalem's Flag Day, where violent far-right Israelis march through the streets and essentially terrorize, assault, spit on Palestinians in Jerusalem and chant genocidal things like death to Arabs. So again, this is an annual thing. And maybe some of you will say, well, okay, this is just some fringe, lunatics who are out in the streets and it's condemnable and whatever. But I don't see any Israeli politicians condemning this. I don't see Benjamin Netanyahu, certainly not Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the kind of guy who would participate in these exact same Flag Day marches. Don't see much condemnation coming from the Israeli government. We also have a take here from an Israeli activist. Her name is Sophia Amuna, who says the quiet part out loud here on the genocidal ambitions.
When there is a war, it doesn't matter who your enemy is. You need to destroy their offspring to prevent them from creating more offspring. You
need to destroy their offspring in order to prevent them from creating more offspring. I mean, you could take this straight out of Mein Kampf, right? You could take this straight out of a Hitler speech from World War II. No, this isn't normal. As a matter of fact, as a part of war. This isn't normal. That's not typically how you're supposed to engage in a war, to kill men, women, children, the offspring, to prevent them. I mean, this is a genocide that you're describing here. That's exactly, by definition, what you're describing here, and seemingly gleeful about it. Now, again, now we finish off with the polling data, because if you think that, okay, well, that's just one lunatic girl, or the people in the streets are just some fringe minority, here's the latest polling data out of Gaza. I believe this was a poll that was done by Penn State University. So this is absolutely wild. They say, to the question, quote, do you support the claim that the IDF, in conquering an enemy city, should act in a manner similar to the way that the Israelites did when they conquered Jericho under the leadership of Joshua, i.e. to kill all of its inhabitants? 47% of all respondents answered in the affirmative. 47%, so half. They say 65% of those surveyed answer that there is a current incarnation of Amalek, again, the biblical story that we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu early after October 7th. And of these, 93% responded that the mitzvah to erase the memory of Amalek is also relevant to that contemporary Amalek. So what this is saying, keep in mind, the biblical story of Amalek calls upon the Israelites to destroy the entirety, right? To destroy men, women, children, infants, suckling and ass and camels and sheep and all of that, right? It is an explicitly genocidal story that we're referencing here. 65%, of those Israeli Jews surveyed in this poll answered that basically Gaza is the current Amalek, meaning we should wipe them out entirely. And again, when even directly asked, should we kill all of the inhabitants in Gaza, 47% said yes. We continue down here. They say it seems that Ginsburg and other ultra-Orthodox rabbis can be particularly proud of the change that has taken place in the Jewish population, with 82% of those surveyed expressing support for the forced deportation of residents from Gaza, and 56% supporting the forced deportation of Arab citizens of Israel. In 2003, the positive answers to these questions were only 45% and 31% respectively. You have 82% of Jewish Israelis supporting the mass ethnic cleansing of the entire Palestinian population from Gaza. You have 56%, an outright majority, a clear majority of Jewish Israelis wanting to expel the Arab population from Israel proper. I mean, if this does not confirm that this is one of, if not the, most openly genocidal and fascistic and racist societies on planet Earth, then I don't know what will. You have a majority of Jewish Israelis saying, not only do I support the genocide in Gaza and the mass ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, but I also support expelling the Arab population from Israel proper. Think about that, right? Think about how many times we've heard people defend Israel by claiming, oh, we're actually like a multicultural and multiracial society. And look, we have Palestinians who live amongst us and they're treated so well, so fairly. And then you look at polling like this. I mean, I would say it's shocking, but it's really not. It's really not. So I guess I'll leave you guys off with there. Again, the atrocities, it is a daily basis that we are seeing horrifying images like the one of that little girl trying to climb her way out of a fire after just witnessing her entire family wiped out in front of her. That's happening on a daily basis. We're talking about dozens and dozens of people, if not more, being slaughtered every single day. Right. And so we're seeing those stories. We're seeing a little bit of pushback, I guess, on the international stage with some Western leaders even seemingly starting to be shaky about their support for Israel. The unfortunate reality right now of the situation is that there's really only one guy in the world who can actually end this, like in an immediate sense. And that's Donald fucking Trump. And that's as disturbing as you could possibly imagine. This is the same Donald Trump who took $100 million from Miriam Adelson effectively to allow Israel to fully annex the West Bank. Right? This is the same Donald Trump that is as aggressively pro-Israel as a person can get. The guy who recognized the capital of Jerusalem, the guy who recognized their illegal occupation of the Golan Heights, right? Still up in the air as to whether or not Trump is willing to go to war with Iran on behalf of Israel. The guy who started bombing the Houthis in order to try to end their blockade in protest of the genocide. So that's a disturbing reality. I wish I could tell you guys that I know how this is going to play out. I wish I could tell you guys the secret magic formula for pushing back against this. But, I guess just ask yourself the fundamental question, right? If you've ever thought about the thought experiment of, well, what would I have done during the Holocaust and World War II? Well, whatever you're doing now is what you would have done back then, because we're witnessing it happen in front of our eyes right now.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me. No one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying